Now, I'm going to go over the rest of the basic liberties we couldn't get through in the last video, including freedom of consciousness and thought, freedom of the person, right to hold private property, and freedom from arbitrary search and seizure. Let's start with the freedom of thought. René Descartes once said, "I think, therefore I am," which is my opening line in every club I go to. I'm handsome because I believe I am. Since then, we have conceived of the mind as a separate substance than the body, and so consciousness has become an important part of political thought. The basic idea is that our bodies are of material concern, while the mind deals with the consciousness and self-awareness. This idea of self-awareness is the core part of the freedom of thought and consciousness. As a citizen of a liberal society, you should have the ability to self-actualize, meaning you should have the ability to grow and become someone who you choose to be. Freedom of thought and consciousness are a big part of self-actualization. Think about it. If you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or even 50s, you're most likely looking back and thinking, "Man, I was really weird and stupid back then." That is because as you grow and experience things, you will change, and there's no way to stop that. So it is better to encourage it. Freedom of thought and consciousness allow you to grow and think about your experiences in a way that is free from persecution. Being able to change one's views on personal ethics is a big part of this. You can be a deontologist, a utilitarian, an Aristotelian, or an spaghetti monsterian in your private life, and the government should have no right to stop you in expressing your beliefs unless they would cause harm. This is why some countries include freedom of expression under liberty of thought and consciousness. We have seen a rise in totalitarian regimes like communism and fascism in the 20th century, which has made this right all the more important. We don't have the time to delve into fascism and communism here, but let's say these two regimes are different than any other authoritarian regimes in the past, because they did not just force people to follow repressive laws, but also made it their mission, using extensive sophisticated propaganda, to make their citizens love the repressive laws. Freedom of consciousness prevents governments from trying to control your mind by telling you what to believe in or which religion to follow. This freedom is also directly connected to the freedom of speech in a very important way. Even if you are not allowed to say what you think, you will still be thinking about it, and preventing you from saying what you think could intensify your feelings about the subject. If I say to you, "Don't talk about black cats," for the foreseeable future, you will only think about black cats. Being able to express yourself through speech is not the only way of expression, of course. People can express themselves by the clothing they wear, or by dancing certain dances, or celebrating certain holidays. Expression goes beyond speech, but speech is a big part of it. This is one of the biggest challenges authoritarian regimes faced. They can force you to follow the law, but they can't make you want to follow the law. This weakness is something totalitarian regimes attempt to remedy, and the most illustrative example of it in fiction is in George Orwell's 1984 novel. But even then, thinking cannot be fully suppressed and becomes a form of resistance itself. So in liberal societies, freedom of consciousness and freedom of speech are intrinsically tied together, because for you to be able to speak your mind, you must first have a free mind. Next item on the agenda is freedom of the person. This freedom manifests in different ways in different countries. Generally, it means people are not subject to mental and physical torture. Let's use Canada as an example. Section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedom guarantees life, liberty, and security to all people residing in the country, meaning no law or state action can deprive any individual from these three fundamental rights unless with accordance with what the Canadians call principles of fundamental justice, which are the sections 8 to 14 of their charter. There is more to it, of course, but I want to move on to the next right, because the next one is the right to property. And if there is one thing people love more than freedom, is stuff. Right to property is perhaps the most thought about in history, since Hobbes was writing his depressing magnum opus, the Leviathan, all the way to everyone's favorite edgy high school theorist Ayn Rand. Right to property has been an important element of our political discourse. Maybe we will go over the history of this right in another video, because it is a history full of Game of Thrones-like wars, betrayals, and philosophers. But for now, let's get all our Jon Snows in order and discuss the right to property itself. Everyone likes stuff. Your house is full of crap you don't need, but you want. And you can have them because you have the right to own property. In the language of the American Declaration of the Right and Duties of Man, every person has the right to own such private property as meets the essential need of decent living and helps to maintain the dignity of the individual and of the home. Like every other of these rights, this right differs in implementation by degree depending on each nation's consideration of what constitutes property. USA is perhaps the biggest proponent of this right. In fact, the United States tripartite motto in Declaration of Independence is life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is directly inspired by John Locke's claim in the Two Treaties of Government, where he defines property as life, liberty, and state. But why is property so important? A proper answer to this question requires a more in-depth discussion of the historical importance of property. But for now, let's just say because with this right, society can prosper materially. This theory is not without its detractors. A Marxist would argue that private property alienates people from their labor, while a post-liberal would argue that by focusing so heavily on property, we are disregarding spiritual needs of the citizens. Although such critiques may be true to an extent, it is undeniable that people enjoy buying. We, at the very least in the West, still look to people who are rich with a degree of reverence. Think about how many people talked about Elon Musk versus Mike Zuckerberg potential UFC fight. Is that because they are on the same level of fighting skills as people like McGregor or Khabib? No, it's because they are rich. People work to buy things, which means they get attached to their things. Will those things give them spiritual fulfillment? No. Could it potentially alienate them from work? Maybe. But given the choice, many seem to still choose this over the alternative. So, despite its flaws, it is a core part of liberal society because people want the stuff they bought, from a new PS5 to land, to be safe from other people and governmental entities. This also ensures that companies are more willing to work in countries where they know people or governments won't randomly take their stuff from them. Speaking of which, freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. This is very closely associated with the previous right to own private property. The government should not be allowed to come in and take your stuff willy-nilly. You should be able to freely enjoy your private property without the government coming in and taking it from you. In the United States, the Fourth Amendment states that the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. The key word here is reasonable. What constitutes reasonable is up to interpretation in many of the cases that has gone through the American court system. For example, you might think to yourself that you have the reasonable right to privacy, but there is no mention of privacy in the US Constitution. However, there is something in the US legal system called expectation of privacy test, which is meant to determine the scope of the Fourth Amendment. There are two elements to this test, which are subjective and objective. Subjective element is when you are discussing personal opinions about situation and places being private, while objective is expectation of privacy supported by law or society. If you think this is abstract, you're absolutely right. And for good reason, because it's easy to say, government can't just come in and search your stuff if they suspect you of something. It's a completely different story to put this into practice. Can a government agent, for example, search your garbage can for clues and go through your dumpster or information you voluntarily provided to a third party? In fact, this led to a dispute between Apple and the American government because Apple refused to provide a backdoor for the government to survey individual iPhones. So what constitutes reasonable is very, very abstract and difficult to pin down. The rights we went through are basic rights and liberties. We did not delve into any one of them in depth, but instead opted for an overview of them. These basic liberties are what separates liberalism from all other forms of government. In the future videos, we might go into detailed critiques of some of these rights by other political ideologies and their reasoning for it. But you can be assured that I will try to make a robust defense of these liberties because despite its flaws, liberalism is still pretty awesome. If you enjoyed the video, please feel free to subscribe to the channel. Like and share the video with other liberal enthusiasts. Liberalism is designed to empower you by restricting the power of the government. These basic liberties are here to make sure you are protected, and you can live a fulfilling life. Are they perfect? Absolutely not. But don't let perfectionist tendency blind you to liberalism's virtue. There are flaws in liberal societies that ought to be addressed and fixed. Like, why shouldn't I be able to force you to subscribe to my channel? But liberalism does have the tools to fix it, and we will go over some of them in future videos.